You thought the stepmothers were bad, but sometimes the fathers in fairy tales are even worse. Today we're talking about two fairy tales, lesser known probably for that reason, both by the Brothers Grimm, but with tales surrounding them from other cultures that are similar. The Maiden Without Hands, that's what it's called, and All Kinds of Fur. Content warning, abuse and incest. Miller is walking down the street and a strange man approaches him and says, "Hey, I will give you all the riches you could possibly dream of. Just give me what's right behind your house." Legit, right? And the miller thinks, well, all that's behind my house is the apple tree. He can have the apple tree. So he says yes and makes the deal, only to go home and find out that his daughter was the one behind the house by the apple tree, and the man he made the deal with was the devil. So the girl draws a white chalk circle around herself and stands inside. And because she is clean physically and morally, he can't take her. And so he's like, well, I'll just come back and try again later. And she can't leave the circle and would just get dirty from standing there in the circle, right? Because she can't wash her hands. Her hands are an important part of this. They need to be clean. But she's so sad that her dad promised her to the devil that she cries on her hands and her hands stay clean from her tears. So the devil finally tells the dad, cut off her hands. That will solve the problem. And he does, but she continues to weep on her stumps and they're clean. And the devil finally just gives up. He's like, no, this isn't worth it. So the dad's rich now and the girl escaped the devil, but she's still done with him, understandably. She leaves and goes out on her own, handless and very helpless. But because she has been pure and good, God sends an angel to help her. She finds the king's royal pear garden and an angel assists her in getting to the garden, crossing through water, kind of parts it like Moses, and then helps her get the pears because, no hands. See, the angel's like bending the boughs down to her so she can eat the pears. So the royal gardener sees her and reports it to the king. He thinks she's like a ghost or something, and the king comes out and spies on her and sees her, realizes that she is human, and she's like, I've been abandoned by everyone but God. And he says, well, I will not abandon you because you are beautiful. I'm gonna marry you. And they get married. And he gives her new hands made of silver. I can't imagine they would be very functional, but they're fancy. And the king goes out to war while she's pregnant, and he wants someone to send a letter when she has the baby. And she has the baby, and they send the letter, and he sends one back, but the devil gets involved again, and he changes the letter so that the letter says, murder the queen, because it's a changeling. The devil lies that it's a changeling and not a human baby. And she takes her baby and goes and lives in the woods in a hut for 7 years. And during those 7 years, her hands get magically restored for her bravery, purity, all of that, by God. So King gets home from war, finds out the trick that has happened, sets out to find her. He finds her living in the hut, and she's like, OMG, I'm your wife. And he's like, no, my wife has silver hands. And in a very Cinderella fashion, she brings out the silver hands, and she's like, look. And he's like, oh, okay. However, in earlier, darker versions and other versions all around the world, the reason for the dismemberment of the protagonist is the sexual advances of her father or her brother. There's an Italian one called Penta of the chopped up hands where she chops them off to rebuff the advances of her brother. But in most of them, it's the father. And in another Italian one, specifically, she cuts her hands off because he says that's the most attractive part of her. And there's actually an entire category of fairy tales about fathers trying to marry their daughters, usually kings trying to marry their princess daughters. One of the most famous ones that I'm going to talk about is called All Kinds of Fur, which is another Brothers Grimm story. The German name for this story, the German term for all kinds of fur is Allerlei Rau. I know I butchered that. I'm actually extremely German American. My father's mother's maiden name was Schneider, but I don't speak German. Anyway, in this story, like a lot of others, the king's wife dies and she says, because we have to make this the woman's fault, you can't marry anyone who is more beautiful than me, or you have to marry someone who has like all of my features, has my exact golden hair, depending on the story. And he looks around everywhere he can, but the only one who has those features or that hair or is as beautiful is his own daughter. It always starts with the king being reluctant about this. He has to do it because that's what his dying wife asked for. But quickly, he gets into it, obsessed with it. In some of the stories, it literally says that he gets heated with lust in the Italian one. In the Grimm Brothers' All Kinds of Fur, it says he suddenly felt a very violent love for her. So she's horrified, his counselors are horrified, but there's nothing they can do, so she tries to buy some time. She's like, I'll marry you, but only if you can get me a dress as gold as the sun, a dress as silvery as the moon, a dress as bright as the stars, and then a coat made from every single animal pelt on earth. It's where all kinds of fur comes in. Unfortunately, the king does accomplish it, and they bring him the coat of all of the furs. The girl is super sad, and he's like, all right, we're getting married tomorrow. And so she packs her 3 beautiful dresses into walnut shells or hazelnut shells and puts on the fur coat and runs away. She lives on her own in the forest until a king from another kingdom comes through and finds her. And at first they think she's an animal, or the strangest animal they've ever seen, because she's got the furs on. And then they're just like, oh, okay, you're a person. And she's like, yeah, I'm an orphan. I'm just a poor child of God. And they're like, okay, I guess you can come back and work in our kitchens. So she does. And she basically constantly keeps herself hidden with the furs, blackens her face and her hands with soot and stuff, until it gets kind of Cinderella-y, and the king of this new kingdom announces he's doing a ball every night. First night she sneaks in her sundress and then dances with the king, and he's totally taken with her. The next night she does the same thing in her moon dress, and then the last night she does the same thing in her star dress. Now, after each night in the ball, she takes soup to the king for his after-ball soup, I guess, and she like puts little trinkets inside, like a gold ring, like from her previous life, and he's like, where's all this stuff coming from? So on the last night when they're dancing, unbeknownst to her, he sticks the ring on her finger while they're dancing before she runs away. And then that night when she brings him his soup, he sees the ring on her finger, and he's like, ah, you're the maiden I've been searching for. And she says, yes, that was me, and decides to marry him, and they live happily ever after. And she's super safe from her dad. So why do these stories exist and persist? I would argue it speaks to one of the deepest fears of any girl. Dangers abound in these stories. Dangerous men, dangerous beasts. Particularly at a time when women are property and they're passed from their fathers to their husbands, there's the obvious fear of being passed to someone who's awful and going to hurt you. But an even deeper fear is, what if the person who's supposed to protect you, the person you start with in the first place, is the one who's going to hurt you? And it's dark and it's messed up, but it's also real. And I like that these stories, like the Cinderella stories, involve someone escaping a home life that is abusive and dangerous to them. The idea that no matter where you start, the lot you're given in life, that you can escape it and find happiness. Even if you get seriously maimed or damaged along the way, you heal. You come back stronger. The idea that there's nothing you can't come back from. There's nothing that can truly make you unwhole and unworthy, even the worst thing you can imagine. And I think that's pretty great, because it's true. Got so carried away, almost forgot to plug my book like I always do. A fairy tale retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses that is not as dark as the stories I just discussed, but it is as full of hope and strength and female badassery.